Good afternoon, everyone. My name is M.SC, and I'm a professor and program coordinator at the School of Early Childhood at George Brown College and the Senior Policy Fellow at the Atkinson Center for Society and Child Development at OISE at the University of Toronto. I'll be facilitating today's session examining the public advantage of early learning and childcare. We will begin today with a land acknowledgement.
Acknowledging land is something Indigenous people have been practicing for generations, long before settlers arrived. Recognizing the land you are on is an expression of respect and gratitude. OPSU Local 557 would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat, which is now home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We also acknowledge that Toronto is a treaty territory, a relationship between the Mississaugas of the Credit and Canada. This land is also part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the land. Other Indigenous people, settlers, and newcomers have been invited into this treaty in a spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. This means we are all treaty people. As such, it is our responsibility to honor and respect this land and express gratitude for the opportunity to work on and share this land. All my relations. All my relations basically translates to we're all related. It's a reminder that everything in the universe is part of a single whole and is connected in some way to everything else. This means everything and everyone are our relatives, and that they have a purpose and are worthy of respect and care, especially the land and each other. Thank you, Miigwech, Walalyuk, all my relations.
Okay. I'm pleased today to introduce the panel who all have a wealth of experience and knowledge in their respective fields. Maureen Dockendorf is the Superintendent of Reading, Literacy, and Early Learning for the Ministry of Education in British Columbia. She has spent her career in education. She has worked as a teacher, university faculty associate, principal, and assistant superintendent. She has been a team member supporting the redesign of BC's 2019 Early Learning Framework, K-12 curriculum, and core competencies. Maureen leads the ministry's professional learning initiatives, changing results for young children and strengthening early years to kindergarten transitions. Isabelle Vinay is the Executive Director of the Center of Excellence for Early Childhood Development, hosted by the Universities of Montreal and Laval. She has been leading all knowledge mobilization activities with the main focus being the development of the Encyclopedia on Early Childhood Development, a unique, free resource and up-to-date source of information for early childhood development. She also has spent the last 15 years leading another knowledge translation unit affiliated with the University of Montreal, the Centre de Psycho-Éducation de Quebec, supporting and evaluating the implementation of social emotional programs for young children. And Shanley McNamee is the General Manager of Children's Services at the City of Toronto. She led the development and implementation of a number of key initiatives, including a new system-wide funding model for the city's childcare sector and Council's childcare growth strategy. Shanley is committed to driving improved services, access, and for families, and advocating and advancing implementation of an integrated system of early learning and care services for Toronto's children and their families. Thank you all for joining us here today. To all participants, we ask that you please use the Q&A icon to ask your questions. We will begin today by first hearing from Maureen.
Okay, thank you. And I was going to say good morning because I'm coming to you from British Columbia. So it is good morning here, but good afternoon to those of you across Canada. So I'm going to focus specifically today on the public advantage of early learning and childcare through the lens of the integration of childcare into the Ministry of Education. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk specifically about 4 initiatives that have been really helpful to us in informing system change. So in British Columbia, unlike so many of you across Canada, where you already have childcare integrated into the Ministry of Ed, in British Columbia, we do not. In fact, our childcare services are siloed in 3 ministries: Ministry of Health, Ministry of Children and Family Development, and Ministry of Ed. So this is a big step for us in British Columbia. I think the advantage we have is to learn from the incredible work out of the Maritime provinces, out of Manitoba, and for certain out of Ontario. So we have learned a lot, now looking to the Yukon that is doing some very innovative work. So we have lots of lessons to learn from all of you. So today, these probably won't be new to you, but they are really new initiatives for us as we begin the process, and we're just in process right now of integrating childcare into the Ministry of Education. So I'm going to go through just 4 of the initiatives I've chosen that have been really helpful for us in informing system change. So the first one, we'll go to the next slide. Integrating childcare into BC's public education system. I really would, if you want to read the details, I would really refer to the roadmap for $10 a day childcare in BC. The Early Childhood Educators of British Columbia and Childcare Advocates of BC have done an incredible job putting together a roadmap. And that too, we have a lot to learn from the structures they've put in place, the policies that they're suggesting. And we are just at the beginning of this process. By 2023, childcare will be integrated fully into the Ministry of Education. So we're just in the process of figuring out what that might look like. We have the infrastructure in public education. I think that that's so critically important. We're building on an infrastructure that already exists. We have experience, and if you take a look at these 4 elements that are listed right here, to build a public system of childcare, they include legislated universal right to participate, public funding and democratic control of the system, a respected, highly educated workforce, and a high level of public understanding and experience within a system. We have a system, we're building on that infrastructure. Next slide. Government, as we begin to move childcare into public education, critically important that we honor and respect the rights of young children and the professionals who work with them. And I really want to hold up the work of the early childhood educators, their knowledge, their wisdom, their professionalism, and really critically important to be holding up that work. Integrating childcare and education as strong and equal partners. And so important that there's both voices and that they're looked at as strong and equal. That it's supported by early childhood pedagogical and public policy, as well as public funding. And we need a strong implementation plan, a strong transition plan, which we're just in the process of formulating. And we know that we need to be flexible. There needs to be lots of professional development and learning and opportunities to learn as we grow. Next slide. We in British Columbia have already offered some things in our public education system that are focused on early care and learning. So we have full day kindergarten, we have Strong Start, and those Strong Start centers are drop-in centers where parents and caregivers can come with their kids. We have a new program called Just Be 4. In other words, just be 4 years old. This is not getting ready for anything. This is just be who you are. Be present in the moment. Just be 4. And that's an extension of Strong Start. So we have Strong Start in the morning and then a 4-year-old early childhood education program in the afternoon. Again, not new to many of you, but certainly new to us in BC. And now the ministry is funding 24 seamless days projects, and I'll describe those in another slide. Next slide, please. So the second thing that has been really helpful to us is the revision of BC's early learning framework And I so appreciated hearing Nicole yesterday. And if you hadn't taken a look at the revision of the BC Early Learning Framework, I invite you to do so, because Indigenous knowledge keepers, scholars worked side by side with us as we revised this document. So woven throughout the fabric of the early learning framework are the First Peoples principles of learning and a focus on decolonizing and indigenizing our work. So please, if you're interested in that, please take a look at it. So this has been really helpful to us because our early learning framework was published in 2009, and it was from birth to 6 years old. This time it's birth to 8 years old. So primary teachers who have not necessarily paid attention to the early learning framework are doing so now, because this is inclusive of them. So this has been a real meeting place for joint professional learning. And on the top, you can see the BC core curriculum. So those BC core curriculum, that in combination with the early learning framework gives us the pedagogy to move forward in an integrated way. Next slide, please. The third initiative I just want to highlight is our communities of practice. So we have 60 school districts in British Columbia. 48 out of 60 school districts are involved in the first initiative called Changing Results for Young Children. Changing Results for Young Children brings together early childhood educators from community-based programs, early childhood educators from our Strong Start centers, and primary teachers. And they come together for 6 half days of professional learning throughout the year. They come in triads, so they all service the same families and kids, the same neighborhoods. And in some cases, they have never met or talked or worked together before. So this initiative, and there's over 700 participants involved in over 48 school districts, and they come together 6 half times, facilitated by a facilitator that we contract with, who has expertise in early learning, expertise in collaborative inquiry, because this is all based on collaborative inquiry, and also expertise in social emotional learning. So the focus is on improving well-being outcomes, social and emotional outcomes for young children. But the second subtext of this is really working with the educators and working with their well-being, because we know how you feel affects how you learn. So a whole focus on well-being. And I can't tell you, in this climate, this pandemic climate, where we have had to go virtual with all of these meetings, it has been really trying year. And at that, we still have 48 school districts involved. I would offer the website there. You can see it, cr4yr.com. Please go and have a look there. The other piece I want to highlight here is the Ministry of Education pays for release time. Release time for early childhood educators that are community-based, release time for the ECEs that are part of our system, and release time for the teachers. So we are not asking this professional learning to happen at night and on the weekend. We do it during the day. And they are released and come together. And this is going into our 5th year of Changing Results for Young Children. The second community of practice is strengthening early years to kindergarten transitions. And that brings together community and school districts working together, focused on a community where there are inequities that should not be happening, focused on that community and what will it take to actually strengthen those transitions from early years sectors and programs into the school system. So both of these communities of practice really looking at bringing together the two systems, which have in British Columbia been separated for a long time: early years sector, school system. So this is the practice that is taking place all over our province to really strengthen and bring continuity of learning to those two systems. And that takes work and that takes time. We're in year 5 of this. Next slide. just a glimpse into what that looks like as a community of practice. Here we are meeting for changing results for young children. Next slide, please. And finally, the seamless day, which shout out to Waterloo because in Toronto, where we came to visit to learn about what you were doing. And we now have about to go into 24 of these seamless day programs throughout British Columbia. And that's, you're familiar with, I know many of you probably work in it, where the early childhood educator works as the before school person and then in the kindergarten classroom. And then a new early childhood educator comes in halfway through the day, works with the kindergarten teachers side by side, learning from one another, and then does the after school portion of the after school care. We definitely learned from Ontario, and the class sizes in these kindergarten seamless day pilots remain the same, which is 20 to maximum 22 kids. So this has been really interesting, raising the professionalism of the early childhood educator who knows so much, has so much knowledge of those children and those families. And, you know, really, as somebody who's spent my life in the school system, I taught kindergarten for 9 years. You know, we just did not reach out enough to those early childhood educators. And I hold you up and your professionalism up. And when we think about integrating childcare into education, it's about pushing the pedagogy of play up the system. All the early childhood learning that you have up the system, the antithesis of schoolification, which we are not interested in doing. We are interested in promoting the pedagogy of play throughout our system. And I'm looking forward to hearing Isabelle. I'm going to segue to you, Isabelle. Please, we have learned so much from you in Quebec.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Maureen. I must say, I am impressed. I hope my presentation will be at least a little bit exciting as yours, but I just must say that, you know, in Quebec, of course, there is a story. You know, the public system was developed many years ago, but there's still room, you know, to learn. And, you know, though I'm impressed with the breaking the silos that you are undertaking in BC. You know, in Quebec, the early childhood education and care is still in a different ministry from education. And it's a recommendation that we have about, you know, integrating and even creating a ministry from birth to 16 years old, right? So I'm looking forward to know more about what you're doing in BC. So in Quebec, yes, it's you know, that little seed has grown over the years. Still, there are lessons learned, and I'm here very humbly sharing the Quebec experience. I'm not an expert in you know, policies, but I would be happy if you have specific questions to connect you with some people who are in Quebec. So a small story, a little story of an ambitious project. You know, in preparation of this conference or this meeting, I read a little bit more about the story in Quebec, and I was really interested in understanding from the 60s, really, in Quebec. That seed of having a public system was already in discussion. Of course, in the 60s and 70s, it was all the daycare centers were private. But then in 1979, there was the Child Care Services Act that prioritized and stated the development of the importance of creating cooperatives and nonprofit enterprise around daycares, enterprise that would be led by parents. So that idea was already there in the 70s. And I also went back and realized that in the early 70s in Quebec, with federal funding, the really first cooperatives of daycare as centers were created, and they were only maybe less than 300 across Quebec, but they were already there. And so it was something in the air, knowing, should we be shifting to that? And in 1991, a report that still resonates a lot, called Québec Fou de ses enfants. In the bad translation in English would be Quebec crazy about these children. And really, again, that idea of, if you want to work at lowering poverty, if you want to work into making a more healthy society, you should start very early with accessibility and prevention early on. So this was the very first steps of the public system. So really, that was created in 1997 with the adoption of the family policy of children at the heart of our choices. And I just wanted to bring back that that vision in 1997 was universality of access, quality of services, making sure that the most vulnerable children would access it. So give, increase assistance to low-income families and others, equality of opportunity, and the creation of the Ministry of Family was done at that moment in time. And this is when really what we call the public system is called the CPE, Centre de la Petite Enfance, CPE. I will come back to that. So the $5 a day thing started then. So yes, there were some gains we know about, and they were measured in terms of when we evaluate. There are big evaluation in Quebec, and I will get back to that. But of course, economists, really made those mathematics happen, and we can see in Fortin in Université du Québec à Montréal was really interested about the impact on the labor participation to the labor market. I will be back with a slide on that. And so, of course, the balance, the family work balance, increased support to families, the fathers being able to spend more time with the leaves for them also was, and the quality. Yes, in the public system, and as you will see, we have seen that, yeah, those are centers where quality happens. Still a lot of room to be filled. So as I was saying, those graphs come from an economist, and obviously I'm not, but just in terms of the labor force participation rates of mothers with children under 5, you can see the difference. And I'm sure it's statistically convincing from 1998 to 2014. You can see that, it's significant, the increase of the participation that we can link to the creation of the public network system. So this, again, a lot of things were written over time, and reports on that is there. I just wanted to address that there were some setbacks. And those setbacks are mainly related to those ways of funding the system. So in 2003, it was the end of the, I'm hoping my word is okay, the moratorium. I tried to translate a word in French. I think it's the right word, but there was some, something that protected from 1997, the creation of the public network, to 2003. You cannot develop the private sectors. It was all about investing and creating places in the public system. So it was the end of it. So we saw an increase of, and it's not that much, as you can see. In 2003, it was $7 a day instead of 5. It's now, because we're back to a unique fee of $8.50 a day in Quebec. But then from 2006, we could see the first waves of major budget cuts in the public system investment. So we 200 and so millions were cut off the investment in the creation of places in the public system. But then also in 2009, there were some change in the government, and there was a rapid growth of the number of places in non-subsidized daycare. So we went through that phase, and we were saying, well, it's 100% increase of the non-subsidized daycare. So the licensing really went out in those years. It came with tax credit enhancement, and it created a competition between centers. between the private sector and the public sector, where, you know, at the end, if you were it's a change, an interesting change that really was concreted in 2015. The modulation of the child care rates now being based on the family income instead of just a unique fee. And that what it created really is that, you know, it didn't make a lot of difference, because that fee for the public system, there was a basic fee, and then you would add additional fees related to your family income. So at the end, with the tax credit enhancement, it didn't make, you know, you would pay the same thing from the private sector to the public sector. I'm sorry if I'm not clear. Just feel free to ask questions, but it's just that we could see that shift. And, you know, in Quebec in 2017, there was a big commission of the state of early childhood education and care in Quebec, you know, 20 years after the creation of the network. You know, experts from the field, early childhood educators from the field, you know, coming and saying, well, what 20 years later, what should be enhanced now in the system? And a lot of those people came to the commission and submitted some kind of a report. They said, well, you know what? We saw that shift from our public, our CPO to the private sectors. And also with the cuts that happened, what really happened is we had to make choices in where in the budget we would be cutting. And the first thing that came as and many people said in that commission in 2017 is that they had to cut down on pedagogical advisors working within the centers. And those are the ones, you know, planning for training, professional development, supporting, working as a team with early childhood educators. So this is where we could see that, well, there were a lot of service providers were saying this is where we had to cut, right? So just a quick, it's just a graph about the distribution of spaces between the private and public system right now. So the yellow kind of orange piece is the 100% subsidized daycare center that not now in 2000, well, those are data from 2016, but it's about the same, 33%, you know, of the places are within the CPF. And I just, with my pink little box there, I was, you know, at the creation of, or almost of the public system in 1998, 45%, and that piece was bigger. And if you look at the two small pieces that are growing, and I've grown a lot during that period of cuts and changing in the tax credit things. You could see that, you know, from zero in 1998, from zero non-subsidized daycares are almost 0%. They are up now to 16%. And it's almost, you know, that shift that happened from the CPA to the burgundy piece of not subsidized. So just to make sure in Quebec, you have that 100% network of subsidized, and this is the public system. But then you also have the pink kind of reddish piece there is the subsidized, partly subsidized daycares we have. And then the green piece is I just heard myself, the green piece, not the group, but the green piece of the pie, were the home-based subsidized daycares. So it's just that it's changing, the image has changed, and when we raised in that commission, 20 that happened in 2017, as I mentioned, you know, quality was addressed, and you know, we have had in Quebec different waves of evaluation of the quality of the different kind of services offered. So basically, we had two big studies in 2003 and another one, a follow-up study in 2014. And the change about the quality, we didn't see any, it's not getting better. It stays about the same, and it's different from that kind of the private sector and the public system. So if you look at the pink bars, it's what the poor quality. When you divide in, you know, with those big evaluation of quality, you can divide the good and from the bad. And so as you can see, what's considered bad quality or poor quality, well, the CPA are underrepresented, you know, in the pink, as the non-subsidized, they are more, a bigger percentage of those centers were evaluated as the quality was not there enough. But still, if you look at the orange bar, and it's about the good to excellent quality, you can see again that the CPA, the public system, is clearly there's a difference there, but it's still only 45% of centers that are qualified as being excellent to good quality, and it did not get better over the years. And one explanation that, you know, service providers and experts and are saying is that, well, you know, those the cuts that happened in the public system came with the cut in as I was saying, pedagogical aid, and they can see that, you know, less training, less support, less, you know, it had maybe an impact, but it did not diminish, but it did not it's not better. So one thing that that is there still in Quebec is that, as you remember, that, you know, at the very beginning of that, those first seeds of the public systems was about making sure that equity was there, access for every children, but still there is still a room for improvement. So in 1997, there was a big longitudinal study of child development in Quebec. The same happened on the national level. And you know, over the years, with those data that year after year they would be gathering, and the researchers, we could see that the most vulnerable would benefit the most from the most quality settings. But yet, they are the less likely to attend those services. Children with, you know, from maybe most low SES or so. I'm sorry, I try to move quick, and the words doesn't go as quick in my head. I'm trying to calm down. So less likely to be attending the early childhood education. So there's still room, and we need to find ways to bring those children in the system and to be benefiting from early childhood education services, but also, and that's what the last slide is all about. With that big study, we could see that they are the more likely to be part of those centers qualified by, you know, a tool as maybe less quality. So the green bar is going there, so it's divided in 4 quartiles about dividing families in different social economic status, from children from low economic status, because the vertical line is about quality, and then the horizontal one is about the different quartiles. So low ACS going to higher socioeconomic status. So you can see that as you have the chance to be more in an advantaged social economic status, well, the bigger the chance that you are at accessing the better quality centers. In our case, as measured at a different point in times, but still we need to evaluate again if the quality is raising as a whole. But I guess I must stop now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. And we will now hear from Shanley McNamee.
Thank you. And thank you, Isabelle and Maureen, for your presentations. You know, you sharing your work and the journeys that you have been on and you continue to be on is so valuable, particularly, you know, with the federal announcement of a national childcare plan. I think we really do all need to share those lessons and those valuable insights. And Isabelle, you know, as you know, across the country, women's participation in the labor market has been significantly impacted by COVID. And, you know, your model shows that if we want to get women back into the labor market, you know, high quality childcare and access to those services is really critical for us. So thank you. As you know, the focus of today's session is the public advantage of early learning in childcare. So my presentation today will touch on opportunities and successes we have achieved in Toronto through a well-planned, well-managed system. I'll touch on how COVID has disrupted families in the sector and how, as we work towards recovery, we must use this as an opportunity to address long-standing issues of equity and access. As the service system manager for childcare and early learning services in Toronto, our system is very large and often very complex. However, this is not unique to Toronto, we know that. In Ontario, local service system managers are proven leaders and experts on the needs of children and families in their unique communities. As municipal leaders, we have the expertise required to partner with other levels of government in planning, enabling, implementation, transformation, and we must continue to have a seat at the table to have the greatest impact. In Toronto, there are a variety of programs and services for children and families, much like some of the services we've heard described here today. This includes licensed childcare in centers and homes, early on child and family centers, before and after school programs for kindergarten and school-age children, extended day programs operated by school boards, and providing service and supports for children with extra support needs, and finally, delivering childcare fee subsidies to help eligible families with all or part of the cost of licensed childcare. Our municipal focus is on service system planning and management and supporting the implementation of a sound, stable delivery model which meets the needs of our unique local communities. Municipalities are the level of government closest to their communities, and through local service plans, we work to address matters of provincial and federal interest. So we work, to achieve the goals that they're interested in. But more importantly, we have the opportunity to address municipal priorities and strategic actions unique to our regions and our cities. Management of a system this large obviously requires rich data and strong partnerships with early learning and childcare community, so operators across the sector, working very closely with school boards. They've been a key partner in Toronto, and working with other municipal partners. A well-developed childcare system definitely includes a role for municipalities. Next slide, please. Oh, can you go back one? Thank you. Sorry. So Toronto has a long history of planning and providing services that promote equity, access, and quality. We are not strangers to policy change, and we have a very strong track record of working with other levels of government to shape and implement at the local level and achieve those shared goals. Through joint planning and delivery, we can ensure investments are impactful in addressing access, equity, and quality. Municipalities also have the unique opportunity to leverage other municipal services, expertise, and partners in areas like public health, which this year, throughout 2020, has been, believe me, our strongest partner ever in Toronto. I'm sure you probably have the similar experience. It allows us to access recreation services, libraries, to build and become part of broader capital projects. And in Toronto, we work to contribute to the newcomer and poverty reduction strategies, which are broad citywide strategies. High quality childcare is an important contributor to positive outcomes, and it's a mechanism to equalize outcomes for our most vulnerable children and families. Success in improving outcomes for children and families requires a system management role at the municipal level. Well, I wouldn't say requires, because obviously some provinces, are very successful without it. But in Ontario, that has been a very successful model. It's really enabled us to shape and develop plans that meet local and neighborhood needs, because it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. Strategic investment and transformation must be led by informed plans and decisions, and we continue to welcome the opportunity to be engaged and provide our expertise at all stages of the development of a national childcare plan. Next slide, please. This slide shows the inequity scores and identifies areas of Toronto where families were already experiencing the most inequities prior to COVID. These same neighborhoods where these are the same neighborhoods where children and families have been disproportionately impacted by COVID over the last 14 months. Given this, our supports and resources for family and childcare operators in these neighborhoods now requires a more strategic response, more than ever before. And how are we doing that? So Toronto has a number of tools and resources in place to guide planning and management to knit the whole system together to ensure families can access a variety of services and supports. We have a service plan which sets a 5-year direction that addresses provider and family needs and provides for open, transparent, and predictability regarding investments. Our next plan is expected in 2022. Toronto also has a growth strategy, which is a phased plan for growth in spaces, improved affordability, and improved workforce wages for the childcare workforce. This is a 10-year vision, which spans 2017 to 2026, and we are currently reporting out on phase 1 achievements. The childcare growth strategy includes the core pillars of access, affordability, and a thriving workforce. While the pandemic has impacted progress on the growth strategy, the core pillars remain unchanged, and in fact, the need to achieve them has been heightened. To support quality early learning environments, the Assessment for Quality Improvement tool is used in Toronto. It's a validated tool used in infant, toddler, preschool rooms, licensed home childcare, and we're currently working on an outdoor section. Used in Toronto, Durham, and Muskoka, and by the North Shores Micmac District Council, it's used to assess program quality in 21 Indigenous communities across the Atlantic provinces. From 2017 to 2019, there was a steady increase in quality ratings across all age groups in Toronto, with a corresponding decrease in the areas that needed improvement. More importantly, we continue to see improvement in the educator and child interaction section, which is a key component of a quality early learning environment. So in Toronto, we can confidently say that the system of early learning and care is contributing to positive outcomes for children and family, and we can be confident that childcare in Toronto is of a high quality. And finally, collectively, the Toronto Child and Family Network works together to improve quality access and seamless service pathways for families. The network developed Raising the Village, an online platform for accessing population-level data that builds system and operator capacity so that they can use that data to make evidence-informed plans and decisions. Next slide, please. Thank you. Moving from planning to implementation on new funding models for Toronto and the growth strategy. Oh, can you go back? Sorry. Number 5, thanks. Moving from planning to implementation required for new funding models and the growth strategy was large system change in Toronto. We required input from key stakeholders, and that was critical to make sure that we were making the most effective and efficient use of our limited resources. Trust and confidence between the community stakeholders and government partners was essential to get everybody at the table so that we could design, enable, and implement system changes and receive real improvement. Recently, well, 2019, time flies. In 2019, our city manager engaged a research team from U of T and George Brown, who are hosting the event today, so kudos to them. And they were engaged to undertake a review of Toronto's directly operated childcare centres. So in Toronto, the city currently operates 3% of licensed childcare centres directly, and we have the largest licensed home childcare agency in Toronto. I'm happy to say that the researchers' findings demonstrated that Toronto's directly operated childcare centres play a unique role in the Toronto landscape, and they provide complementary value to the services delivered by the community. The review affirmed the leadership the city provides to overall the childcare system through sharing of best practices, and most recently through the development of an emergency childcare model in response to COVID. It also highlighted how the city centers filled gaps and helped to serve the city's most vulnerable families and neighborhoods. Overwhelmingly, the research confirmed the value of publicly operated childcare in its contribution to families, children, the workforce, and the sector. Next slide, please. Certainly, equity and access issues were well known before the pandemic. However, COVID has really highlighted this even further. Women, BIPOC families, and families experiencing trauma have been the hardest hit. We need to ensure in the way forward, we take this as an opportunity to address long-standing issues of equity, access, and a low-paid early childhood workforce. The social and economic changes wrought by COVID are widespread and have had extensive consequences for the system. In Toronto, we've been working very hard to respond and support the sector. So what have we been doing? In Toronto, we allocated support funding using a targeted approach that provided strategic investments in neighborhoods that were disproportionately impacted by COVID. So really, everybody got some funding to support them, but the neighborhoods most impacted actually received more. We provided emergency childcare through our directly operated centers initially in the first lockdown, and then supported community operators to also do the same. We have continuously provided training on enhanced health and safety and have provided mentoring for operators through virtual community of practice sessions. And we worked really hard to protect our past investments and to preserve service levels. That's quite tricky at this time. And also to preserve the progress we made in phase 1 of the growth strategy. The long-term impacts of COVID on demand for childcare are still unknown. However, it's clear we need new structures to address inequities, particularly those that already existed. We certainly need a comprehensive workforce strategy to support, compensate, and recognize the early childhood workforce. This is a key pillar to success. Without our workforce, all the other work will not result in the outcomes that we want to achieve. And we need to continue to advocate for ongoing support until the economy improves and families are able to return to care. Next slide. This is my last slide. So just to reiterate, our core principles for Toronto's growth strategy included affordable childcare, increased access to care, and improved workforce compensation. Happily, these principles align very closely with the federal commitments to a national childcare plan. In the City of Toronto, we feel that we're well positioned to adopt a national childcare plan. We have high quality programs, and the growth strategy has allowed us to quantify the space needed to meet demand. We already have a system in place to address affordability through unique funding programs. When I say we have systems, the work that we've done in Toronto is a very small scale, but certainly lots of lessons learned as we went through that work. Municipal leadership through local service planning and delivery ensures that flexibility can be achieved, and this is really important. Our local service planning ensures we can address the unique needs of our communities, our children and our families, and our early childhood workforce. In Toronto and across Ontario, we have demonstrated success in working with other levels of government to shape transformation and meet shared goals. And I'll just end by saying, we've had some great success through our growth strategy. We invested strategically, and we saw fees, affordability was improved by the fees coming down. We saw compensation going up, and we built through capital and expansions, expanded thousands of spaces. So, but we didn't do this alone, and nor can we. Really, in order to continue on this track and make progress, we need a whole of government approach with common goals and principles to ensure a universal, equitable system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanley, and thank you to all our panelists for wonderful presentations. I invite all participants to use the Q&A function to ask your questions, and I'll pass them along to the panel as best that I can. To begin, I would like to ask the panel a few questions as we wait for participants to formulate theirs. We just heard about the wonderful things that the City of Toronto is doing and Shanley's call for a whole government approach. This question is for Shanley. With the Budget 2021 announcement, what role do you see that municipalities can play in a pan-Canadian ELCC system? And should they be at the table for bilateral negotiations or trilateral negotiations where we know that there is precedence for?
Thank you. So as I kind of highlighted in my presentation, yes, definitely we should be at the table. In Ontario, municipalities already play that critical role in those negotiations, or there's, providing that advice on system management and system delivery. By having a municipal role, I think there's an opportunity to reflect real engagement with our communities. We engage extensively with families, children, stakeholders, and all of that forms part of our 5-year service plan, which really leads the direction. The other thing, I think there's a role, I talked about, you can't have one size fits all. So there has to be flexibility, whether that's, province by province or municipality by municipality. But certainly, Canada is a big country and we have a lot of different needs and issues, and we certainly need to have the ability to have flexibility within our province. But in Ontario, we've had that flexibility within our regions, which has been really important. Ontario is a big province, and things look very different in North Bay than they do in downtown Toronto. So a one-size-fits-all approach never worked. And then the final thing I'll say is, in terms of support, our local councillors are indeed very interested and supportive of Toronto having a seat at the table. Recently at our Economic and Community Development Committee, they passed a recommendation. We should be included in the discussions as an official partner. So certainly we have the support of our local council behind us, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Isabelle, we've heard a lot about Quebec's childcare system, and it was specifically mentioned as a model in the federal budget. What are the most important lessons from Quebec that the federal government should keep top of mind as we enter bilateral negotiations?
Thank you, MS. Again, I'm not the expert of the whole system, but one thing that I could see from recommendations from that big commission on the state of early childhood education and care in Quebec in 2017, I would answer that doing more what Toronto is doing and BC is doing in terms of making sure that we break those silos, we work more with key partners, and involving education. I really like, Maureen, those transition projects and making sure that we involve everyone. But one thing is for sure, if you're serious about quality services, well, the funding should be sustained over time, right? We could see the difference when there are some cuts happening. And in terms of access, clear recommendations would be about making sure that if you fund, by funding the network, the creation of the network, of course, investing in making sure that the wages are interesting, that you could provide training and those conditions, but also you could think of supporting and funding the community centers. That those people working closely with families, vulnerable families, knowing them, having the trust of those families, could be key actors into bringing them to know about those services offered, right? So it means working all together, but it means not only funding the creation of places, but also thinking of who could be in the community actors that we also could support, so we bring those children in, right? Those would be, well, what I understand from the interesting learnings.
Thank you, Isabelle. And Maureen, we heard about your plans for transition into the Ministry of Education and what needs to be done as you transition. What are other advantages that you see to integrating governance as you described?
Yeah, thank you. And again, we're new at this, so we're really working hard to make sense and figure it out and learn from the lessons across Canada. Certainly the infrastructure, we have the infrastructure that's necessary to move forward. And what we have in British Columbia in childcare is a patchwork. We do not have an infrastructure of childcare, and it's just patchwork, looking different, lack of communication, lack of systems thinking. So I think that education hopefully can provide, has the infrastructure to move forward. I think thinking differently is critically important here, and thinking system-wide, and thinking a continuity of learning. And in British Columbia, we, you know, you cross the Rockies and BC is going to do something different. So we flipped around the title of what we're doing to be called Early Care and Learning, hopefully sending a signal to our childcare providers that the care is right there. And of course you need both the care and the learning, but we put the care first. So I think the other advantage we have is we have the advantage to think system-wide, think continuity of learning, and actually, because school districts will have the governance, the ministry will have the governance, is really to promote equity and diversity, and to ensure that there's more equitable and inclusive practices that are happening. The high quality is of critical importance to us. And we heard Karen yesterday talk about quality as a cornerstone. And so that's certainly been our conversation, and it's certainly in our vision. I think we also have the ability to be intentional around the programming we're providing. If you think continuity and you think systems, think equity, think diversity, think inclusion, and ensuring that we are intentional about the program that the programming that we provide as we move forward. The other really important piece, and I draw on the work of Nicole yesterday, is in our revised curriculum and our core competencies, really puts the child at the center, the learner at the center, not curriculum. So it isn't about covering, it's actually about uncovering curriculum, and the child as the lead, and the child surrounded by community, and a more holistic view of the child. And really working with the principles of learning, First Nations principles of learning, as core, as fundamental, as integrated into all the work we're doing. So I think we have the infrastructure, we have the pedagogy. My hope is we have the courage to be bold enough to do what needs to be done.
Thank you so much, Maureen. One question theme that's coming out in the Q&A is around the workforce wages. How are different regions, BC, Quebec, and City of Toronto, how are they dealing with salaries and compensation, the parity between educators in the classroom and educators in childcare centers? If I'll open that to all the panelists, how are your regions addressing issues of salary? I'll invite Shanley to go first.
Thank you. So the issues of salary in Ontario specifically, there is a provincial wage enhancement grant that flows to educators making under a certain threshold. And that threshold is set based on the salaries that early childhood educators working in the school board programs receive in terms of salary. So it strives to close the gap between salaries experienced by early childhood educators working in school boards and those working in the community. So that's one program that's used to start to close the gap. As I said, through our growth strategy, one of the key pillars was workforce compensation. So as new investments were made available to us in the City of Toronto, we strategically worked to strategically invest them. So did quite a bit of data-driven, evidence-driven research to be able to identify to all centers with a service agreement where they fell in terms of highest salaries to lowest, highest fees to lowest, and be able to actually quantify for them where they fell. And then in order to receive this new funding through the growth strategy, we worked with them collaboratively to start to address those. So what we saw from the growth strategy, it was quite significant. So let me just pull that up. So the goal was to improve a third of the wages by 6%. That was the target over a 3-year period. We added base funding to centers for them to do that. And what we saw that was wages increased by 8.1% for early childhood educators and 13% for assistants, with centers in the lowest wage category. So that's great, but without continued new investments or a plan, you know, we're not going to be able to continue to make progress on that, right? That really was a result of new funding investments from the provincial and federal governments. But there is a way to start to close that gap. So that was an important lesson for us.
Thank you, Shanley. Isabelle, if you would like to comment on that.
Yes, again, I could come back with the specifics of it, but one thing is for sure, you know, the Ministry of Family leading all about early childhood education and care, there's still a huge gap between the wages of the early childhood educators and the teachers. And one thing that we observed, because, you know, the pre-K network is developing in Quebec more and more, for, you know, kindergarten for junior K or for 4 years old. And what we have seen is with the creation of those classes opening in Quebec in the school system, there was a shift of educators asking to go and work in those classrooms with 4-year-olds because of the wages, right? So there's still something to be addressed there. And one thing, you know, if we were an integrated ministry would probably, you know, address this problem. But also in terms of, you know, with the bilateral agreements for Quebec, obviously it will not be about creating the network, but addressing quality. And I have not seen any decisions yet, but of course, if the wages, you know, the public system, the wages in the public system are higher than in the private sectors that we know. But again, would it be about raising and providing more money in making sure that you know, the wages go up? But it's to be seen, to be followed.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Isabelle. Maureen?
So again, we're on the pathway in this journey. Part of the plan for sure is to develop a provincial wage grid for early childhood educators. Just in the process right now of actually developing a provincial job description for early childhood educators, specifically working in the seamless day. Part of the givens of being a field test, a pilot site for school districts for the seamless day, because they are funded by the Ministry of Education, is that the early childhood educator is hired full-time, not part-time. And that the early childhood educator becomes a school district employee with all the benefits and the wages that are governed by the union contract in specific school districts. I still see it as an issue that we have not come to terms with. Retention and recruitment is a huge issue in terms of early childhood education in our province. We need at least another 12,000. So there have been incentives, there have been wage incentives. I personally don't think we've gone far enough. And so that is definitely on the table for discussion. So anyone who has any lessons, we would really appreciate learning them. And Nova Scotia, I know you have learned a lot.
Thank you, Maureen. As mentioned, the recruitment and retention crisis of the workforce is a priority. We're currently at approximately 40% access to regulated childcare from 0 to 5. And as we know, with the crisis and the steps that the federal government is taking to create a pan-Canadian early learning system, what are governments doing to take necessary steps for, I mean, we've heard now about salaries, but how do we address the crisis? We know that personal support workers, there's initiatives to subsidize tuition, to increase enrollment in programs. What can be done to incentivize new early childhood educators into the field as we expand access across the country? Maybe we can go backwards now and start with Maureen.
So one of the things we've been working on is how do we support early childhood educators in actually, if they're interested in a degree? So in what ways can we support them? These people cannot afford to take time off work. So what can we put together that supports them in deepening their education, and subsidized for doing so, simultaneously having access, for example, to a degree program. So again, we have not figured this out. I think that's my mantra today. We have not figured this out, but we are certainly in discussion about that. So that and in British Columbia, you could be an early childhood educator in 8 months. And we know that that is not enough professional learning. So how do we incentivize those people that are interested and passionate, and how do we make sure that they're not living below the poverty line to do so?
Thank you. And we know that with recruitment and retention challenges, governments are taking steps dequalifying. Alberta has removed their accreditation process. Ontario has tabled a reduction in qualified ratio to qualified staff. And so this is top of mind and a big fear in the sector. Isabelle.
I could only speak from an experience I'm involved in. There is a big longitudinal studies, a study that started the RCT law with control groups, started in 2009, just before COVID, with 2-year-olds in the public system. And it was about training, it was about professional development and measuring the impact on the social development of children. And what we have seen, we had to stop all about face-to-face training or, consultations. And we have switched to offering, Zoom support. And then with the, and this gave place to try to think outside the box in terms of the offering of the PT development. So online probably will stay, but maybe instead of providing a 6-hour training session, make it like 6 an hour and a half sessions, and maybe it's easier because one thing we are seeing right now, there's reinvestment of money in the public system, so there is money to have access to training, professional development. I'm thinking. And but the shortage in the workforce is, it's difficult to have replacement when you go into training. So it's needs to. But then Maureen, you were saying it being flexible, and also Shanley, it's something, be flexible, offering different kinds of ways to have access to it. And so maybe the COVID situation helped us, to try to be more flexible in the offering of support. But they are creativity, police their creativity, and yeah. So this is an experience that I've been. So I would know exactly what's happening in other for the basic training, but I could get the information.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. Shanley, do you have any comments on
Yeah,
that?
I'll just add that Maureen mentioned needing a provincial salary grid. I totally agree. We actually need a salary grid that fairly compensates the profession as a profession, but we can't just have a salary grid without the corresponding investment. Like, we need the actual funding to actually help people achieve that salary grid, right? Without investments, the tension between affordability and better salaries will never be eliminated. So I definitely like that, Maureen. I think the only other thing I will add is, you know, we've been really thinking a lot about this. The COVID has really had a huge impact on the workforce, the early childhood workforce. So really rethinking how we can strengthen our partnerships with the College of ECE in Ontario, with post-secondary institutions who are, you know, trying to get students through the system and graduated in this strange time. We have continued with community of practice sessions throughout the pandemic, virtual of course, but certainly those have been really valuable. And finally, again, a recent committee report that we took to council, we talked about a very broad marketing and communication strategy that we're about to launch in Toronto, and really thanking the workforce for the valuable work that they've done, being on the front line, supporting essential workers, but also really recognizing the value of the profession, that, you know, these are pedagogical leaders, these are educators. And I think, you know, one of the opportunities in COVID is a lot of folks have seen that and seen that this workforce stepped up. So we're taking this opportunity to try and do a very broad communication and marketing campaign that will be coming soon to really focus on the early childhood education workforce and value them.
Thank you, Shanley, and so important. We have several questions from the audience around, you all spoke about assessing quality in different capacities. Can you just say a little bit about what quality tools your regions are currently using to assess quality, and if there's any plans in the future, and who assesses that quality? If we can start maybe with Shanley. If you can comment on that.
Yep, thank you. In Toronto, we use a tool called the Assessment for Quality Improvement. It is a tool that sets standards and provides guidelines for operators to meet those standards. The tool was developed over a number of years. It can also be used by operators as a self-assessment tool. It is the only Canadian validated rating improvement system. So the tool was validated through U of T at OISE, and through the validation really validated that it does measure quality. The assessments are completed once a year in childcare programs by a group of trained staff that is their only focus is to go out and do those, and they are frequently trained themselves to make sure that they're, you know, not veering from the standards. And the other thing I'll note is in Toronto, the results are posted online for parents. So when parents are looking for childcare, they can actually go in to programs who participate. And in Toronto, if you have a service agreement with the city, meaning you receive public funding, you are required to participate in the AQI process. So parents can go on, they can see the ratings, and really get a sense of when they're looking for childcare, what the quality looks like in that program.
Thank you so much. And Isabelle?
Yeah, in Quebec, well, the different studies use the different tools. So in 2003, the ACRS tool, and I'm trying to figure out what is the ACRS, but it's the evaluation of early childhood education quality. It's standardized worldwide. So in 2003, they were the first study, the one with the Quebec longitudinal study used that, and then at the same time, another tool developed by the Ministry of Family was used, called Grandir en Qualité. But now in Quebec, and it's embedded in the law, all the public system daycare centers, I'm sorry about the term, has to be assessed by and using the class. It's the interaction, the quality of interaction between educators and children that is used, and it's mandatory it's there. So the class, the ACRS, and then there's another tool developed by the Ministry of Family.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. And Maureen, did you want to comment on that?
Say that.
Oh,
okay. Just to say that we have a variety of tools that are being used.
Maureen, you're cutting off. I don't know if you can hear me.
So
Okay.
in this process that we're engaged, can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
Oh, sorry. It says your internet connection is unstable. Sorry. So a variety of tools are used in British Columbia. The downside to that is there is no system-wide thinking. And so part of this journey is ensuring that there are provincial standards, that there is a common tool, and again, part of the process that we're engaged in. So the Strong Start Centers, for example, which are governed by the Ministry of Education, they have a quality assessment tool, also just as Shanley was saying, also can be used for self-evaluation and reflection. But I really think we need to be thinking systems, and at the moment, there isn't one.
Thank you. And that seems to be a theme around needing to work across silos and integrating governance and services. What role do you all see for school boards as we move towards a pan-Canadian vision? We've heard some information from Maureen around that transition and infrastructure, but what roles do you think school boards specifically can play? So I'll maybe start with Maureen on that, since you discussed that in your presentation.
Sure. So just to go a little further, I think there is an absolute role for school boards. And again, this requires a shift in thinking. One aspect is shifting from what we have now of landlord tenants existing on sites, school age providers. There's this landlord tenant relationship. So there's a huge shift that needs to take place where we're really looking at partnership agreements between school districts and the childcare providers. Also, I mean, there's opportunities to offer space, indoor and outdoor space, rent-free. I think another really important role for them is to engage the childcare sector in meaningful conversations so they are at the table from the very beginning of this integration into the system, not after, that their voices are heard, that they're at the table. I just want to go to something Shanley said, is recognizing early childhood educators as professional partners in this learning community. So I could go on and on. I will ask my colleagues to Isabelle and Shanley to come in, but there's a lot of things that school boards can do, and they need to step up, take the lead, and be thinking about strong and equal partnerships with community.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I'll invite Shanley and Isabelle to comment on that if you'd like.
Sure. Maureen, I couldn't agree with you more. Everything Maureen said, I totally agree. But a couple of other things I'll mention. In Toronto, 50% of our childcare sector is more or less located in schools. So they are a key and critical partner. If you think about the demand for childcare, if it becomes affordable, the demand for childcare is going to be massive. And we need to look at that infrastructure that's available already where the children already are. So definitely opportunities. I know, through with the introduction of full day kindergarten, seamless day, and the school boards now operating some of those programs, there's been a lot of work done on joint planning, joint training, so that educators, whether they be early childhood educators or teachers in the classroom, are working together with principals to really become true partners and not the landlord tenant. Am I going to say it's perfect? No, it's not. But, has it evolved and improved? Yes, definitely. And the school boards continue to be at the table faithfully as we are with them to try and move forward. The other thing I might just note, though, is remember in Ontario, childcare is under the Ministry of Education and school boards are under the Ministry of Education. So one of the things we have to work on, sometimes the Ministry of Education, provides directives that are contradictory between childcare and school boards who are in the same buildings. And so we had to work really hard during COVID to make sure whatever health and safety practices and screening and whatnot, it applied, it was consistent. They're the same kids. They might be in this room for this many hours and this room for this many hours. So, there's really a role, I think, for the Ministry of Education to see us more as one system. So that's all I'll add to your comments, Maureen. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanley. I think that's such an important point, as not every province and territory has an integrated governance as we do in Ontario, Quebec, for example, and Manitoba, Alberta. Children's services are not under the Ministry of Education. And so if we're seeing these kind of challenges, even within an integrated system, what challenges are we seeing across in provinces and territories where we don't see that housed under the same ministry? Isabelle, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, well, as I noticed, at the community level where those tables, I'm going to say that, I know it's not good English, but the tables where you discuss early childhood education in a collaborative way, those people gathering around, from the health sector, the local health sector, and then the school boards and all the daycares involved, the private and the public, and all gathering and trying to find a plan and objectives to work with. There were amazing initiatives around that bring, those ideas of let's bring those children and to visit the school, and like the transition project, I'm sure in BC. And those, I must say, those are great and people love and enjoy, and it's a really equal partnership discussion, but it needs to be funded. And because you need time, to, people take time on their time, not at night, to meet and discuss. And so when you take the financial support out, those tables, they cannot continue that amazing work that they've been doing for 5. So, in Quebec, we had that project, and it's just an example, called Avenir d'Enfants. And it was funded by the Ministry of Family and a private foundation. And it was all about, for 10 years, develop those community working around early childhood education. And it was great, but then it stopped, right? The funding stopped. And so some people continue, but, without funding, it's difficult.
Thank you. We're getting several comments from the audience around issues of responding to need. In Ontario, municipalities have a legislated role in the management of early childhood programs. And we know that's not the case in other provinces and territories. We heard yesterday from Karen Gray from the City of Toronto about the increase in mental health challenges and in trauma in families. Also, Nicole spoke on issues of what we've seen since the pandemic, the need for emergency care, flexible hours. Has the impact of COVID-19 given a pause to create family programs that can be more responsive, more flexible, for example, addressing mental health challenges, addressing economic need? Childcare is more than getting women back to work. If it's going to respond to family trauma, it must be high quality. If you can speak to, has it given a pause in the government in terms of what are you providing, what services are being provided, and how can improvements be made to quality to support this trauma? And if I'll start with Shanley, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It's a very good question. In fact, COVID has really exacerbated, the families were already disproportionately impacted given, depending on income and neighborhoods they lived in. And COVID has, just definitely made that worse, but made it so evident. So, it was maybe a problem that people weren't aware of, but through COVID, we've seen, hotspots in Toronto and a number of other issues. So, but what I'll say is, in order to address that, so definitely, our focus right now, we've focused quite a bit on educating the sector. So we did a reach out and a whole session on vaccine education across the City of Toronto to try and encourage people to get vaccinated. We've provided mental health and wellness supports and are planning planning to launch a sector-wide professional learning day related to mental health. So for the staff, right? Because the staff need to feel supported and well, and their mental health is important so they can come to work every day and, you know, support the children. And we've really started to talk a lot in Toronto about those trauma informed practices and how, as children and families are either at home, we can support them through our early on programs, or you know, we can support them in licensed group center and home childcare. And definitely that's going to be important work for us. We've just really started working with other partners to say, how can we support this sector who's really going to be dealing with a number of children and families in trauma. So that's definitely very important work and something that is a priority for us.
Great, thank you so much, Shanley. Isabelle, you mentioned in your discussion about the importance of the community and community programs in outreach. Could you comment a little bit more about that in this context?
I don't know if there was room from the government, you know, to maybe address and take a step back into thinking things. But what I have noticed in different projects I'm involved in is that, you know, that support that comes from the local health services to the early childhood and care or schools, you know, those people more in the prevention side of it and being there to support and being there for the early childhood educators, as you know, providing support or children, they were all invested in, you know, those measures, special measures about, you know, making sure the mask is there and what would we do with children. And they were all saying, well, you know what, we would like to organize something or to be part of a support we could provide to the centers, but we're all about, you know, the organizing the vaccination. So because probably we are very linked in Quebec with the public health agencies supporting you know, in a collaborative way. So what we have seen is people needing a lot of support, but maybe receiving less with the situation of those people maybe being so working 60 hours a week on those measures. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Isabelle. Maureen, did you have any comments to add to that? I think, oh, there she is.
Okay.
Sorry,
Mike, did you?
I hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's going in and out. Just to take a slightly different twist on this, in changing results for young children, because our focus is on improving social and emotional well-being outcomes for kids. This year, due to the pandemic, and again, yes, absolutely, I had to meet virtual. We really focused on the well-being of the adult, of the early childhood educator and the educator from the school system. So if you think we have over 700, 2/3 of these folks are early childhood educators, 1/3 are educators from the school system. And we took a focus on really supporting their well-being, because meanwhile, they're the very people that are supporting the families and the children. And it's really, I invite you to go onto that website. We did 6 in-depth interviews with educators from around the province. What difference was this making, coming together once a month in a community of practice with others? And just to hear about you know, the resilience that these educators have had this year is just really, it's just heartwarming. But we definitely paid attention with intentionality to supporting their well-being. You know, comments where it's so great to be in a professional learning community where we weren't talking about cleaning, and where we were talking about what our passion is, and that's teaching and learning with families and kids. So that well-being focus this year, really on the adult, I think made a difference, and I think it's critically important that we're supporting them and their well-being.
Great, Maureen, thank you so much for that. We had a comment from a participant that really touched up on what you just talked about the importance of interprofessional teams being formed, coming together throughout various systems, identifying gaps and what impacts children and educators. So thank you so much for that. And really in line with what you all just said, there is really a fear that COVID-19 has put focus on childcare back in terms of a commodity of economy. And so as we think about expansion and federal dollars, how do we ensure that we keep children at the center of these policy discussions and decisions when we know that the economy and getting women and parents back to work is top of mind for many policymakers? Without keeping children in mind, we will see an uptick in for-profit and commercial operation and providers and unregulated home care. And we know that will not meet the needs of the current complex needs of children and families. Speaking on that, I want to ask you all around, specifically around the commercial sector. Minister Hussein has discussed a role for for-profit organizations in a pan-Canadian expansion, mentioning that they too are players in the sector. We have seen the impact of privatization of care in the long-term care facilities during the pandemic. What are your thoughts on the role of the private sector and public funding allocation to this group? So if I can start with Shanley, if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, thank you. So definitely the federal announcement signaled a leaning to the not-for-profit sector and public sector. In Toronto, we have had in place since 2004 a council directive that all expansion would be in not-for-profit or public service delivery. So, that's the model that we have been using for many years. It's been extremely successful. And I guess, what I'll say, although we do have some commercial operators in Toronto that, have service agreements and they're grandparented, but we stopped expanding in commercial at that time. I guess, the way I see it, the greater the public investment. So over, the past several years, there's been significant public investment in childcare in Ontario. And if the federal plan goes well, I think we're going to see more significant investment. But with that public investment, there has to be there has to be the service system management role. There has to be accountability. The investments have to be targeted. And, we've had great success in doing that. But as I said, we're not engaged with the kind of commercial sector that's off on its own. So it'll be interesting to see how that, how that materializes across Ontario, but also, across the country.
Thank you so much, Shanley. Isabelle, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I totally agree with Shanley. If there's support given to the commercial daycares, it should come with accountability and making sure that they use the same curriculum and that there are some visits in terms of the regulation being respected. That's not what we've been saying in Quebec. So I think that if the idea is surely, and I just wanted to say, when the quality issue was addressed and the private versus the public, of course there are excellent private centers and maybe less good in the public, but it's all about making sure we have a good and accountability I think is the word if we were to go in that direction.
Great, thank you so much. Maureen?
Well, I feel pretty strongly that public money should be spent on public systems. And I'm pretty passionate about that. That being said, we have no intention of dismantling sole proprietors. They have been the backbone for families and children in terms of service. And what were the conversations at the provincial level are that in order to continue receiving funding, there would be a set of conditions that would need to be met. Those conditions would include a reflection of the provincial wage grid that you will see happen, I predict, in British Columbia, that there's a cap on parent fees, and that there is a pedagogical practice utilizing the revised early learning framework. So again, trying to bring continuity to our system by utilizing the early learning framework. So that's the conversations that are happening right now. I'd love to come back in 5 years and let you know if we made it all happen.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I would like to invite you now all to give a few minutes of any kind of last thoughts or key messages that you would like to share. If you could summarize your, those important take-home messages in 2 minutes, that would be great. And we'll go in the same order that you began today, Maureen.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm just going to end by saying that we have a moral and ethical responsibility to prioritize the early years and to see value in intentional ways of knowing and being, and to take that pedagogy that is so rich in early childhood education and move that up our system. And I think with intentionality, with purpose, and putting the rights of every child and every family at the center. And it will take all of us to do that as we move forward. And thinking about, early childhood education as the process of becoming, of being human, and that human condition, so critically important. You heard Nicole yesterday, surrounded by love, surrounded by care, surrounded by community. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to hold that up.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Isabelle.
Well, one of my takeaway messages, well, I came from Maureen and Shanley, so interesting things also, but when, you emphasized on the impact of the importance of taking care of the well-being of our force, of the early childhood educators, qualities about taking care, offering them support, wages, conditions that meet, the amazing work that's being done there. So yeah, the well-being and should be addressed in terms of training, but also a place and the community of practice that you've been emphasizing also. I think it's a great thing. The only thing I would add also is we didn't talk much about the families today, and it's okay. It was not the purpose of the discussion, but of course, within the project in Quebec, families are, a big piece of how we work with parents and families. And if we are serious about helping children, it's about also making sure that we provide help and support, from the first pregnancy, and being all working together and offering spaces, quality spaces, for those children. So it's of course it's a whole, and there are so great initiatives coming from the community centers, as that should be part of a community project around the early childhood education.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. And lastly, Shanley.
Thank you. So first of all, let me say I really enjoyed hearing from everybody today. I feel like I know you now, even though we've never met in person. So virtual is good sometimes. Maybe one day I'll go on a road trip to your provinces and see things firsthand. But thank you for that. I guess, I kind of touched on a few things. Obviously, we've had some success in Toronto trying to address affordability, access, and improve compensation for the workforce, but there's much, much more work to be done. And I think it's really important that we remember we need a whole of government approach. These are not small tasks, right? And getting moving forward in a way that supports families, outcomes for children and families, the workforce, meets demand. That's going to be extremely challenging to meet the demand if childcare truly becomes affordable, which I think you experienced in Quebec. So I think we need a whole of government approach. We need very strong policy and conditions. We need investments. It's not just good enough to have a policy. We need the corresponding investments. And I think we need accountability so that as the system evolves, we're being accountable to our families. Is this providing them with the services they need for the best possible outcome? So I think that's all I would say. It's an exciting time. We're certainly all going to be busy, I think, for the next couple of years, but very exciting. And, I look forward to hearing more about some of the successes in the other provinces. So thank you for including me today.
Thank you so much. As we move forward, especially with the federal budget announcement and future plans of a pan-Canadian vision, we will need to balance specific regional needs, as you've heard today, with evidence-based practice. Today, our panelists highlighted the importance of public funding, sustainability, transition programs, and the continuum of learning, supporting a professional workforce that should be at the forefront of discussions, and working across silos, integrating services, building a strong infrastructure, a strong public infrastructure that includes accountability measures. I'd like to thank all our panel for a wonderful, informative, and lively discussion on the public advantage of early learning and childcare. Please join us tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for day 3 of the Summer Institute, where we will hear about the workforce, which we have heard over the last 2 days and its importance. We have an exciting panel for you tomorrow. Armin Yalnizian, Senior Economist at the Atkinson Foundation, Alana Powell, Executive Director at the AECEO, and our own Carrie McQuaig, Fellow in Early Childhood Policy at the Atkinson. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you all tomorrow.